It's December 25th, 2024. And well, while so many are unwrapping presents and having their eggnog, we're doing something a little different. We're going on a deep dive into the history of Christmas itself.
Yeah, I think one of the most interesting things is how much of what we consider Christmas tradition actually came from way before Christianity even existed. We're going to get into all that, those echoes of insight.
Yeah. So you probably know all about Santa and his reindeer, but did you know that many of these beloved Christmas traditions actually come from ancient pagan festivals, like Saturnalia and Yule?
Exactly.
Yeah, it's more fascinating and complex than you might think.
Way more complex. So, think back to those history lessons about Roman emperors and Greek gods.
Right.
Turns out they actually have something to do with your stocking full of goodies.
It's all connected.
It is. So we'll unpack how early Christianity really kind of rebranded these celebrations and aligned them with their own narratives. We're talking solstice celebrations, astrological symbolism, the whole nine yards.
It's going to be a deep dive. Okay, so let's just start with something that might surprise some people. December 25th. Not actually Jesus' birthday. I know, I was surprised too when I first learned that.
Yeah, it's a common misconception. The Bible never actually says December 25th is his birthday. This date was chosen much later, actually in the 4th century CE, to coincide with existing pagan festivals like Saturnalia, which was celebrated in ancient Rome, and Sol Invictus, which translates to the unconquered sun.
So they strategically chose that date as a way to kind of blend the birth of Jesus, the light of the world, with the symbolic rebirth of the sun during the winter solstice. That's powerful.
Very powerful. Early Christians were incredibly strategic about how they merged their own beliefs with traditions that already existed. They understood the power of symbolism and ritual, and they really used it to their advantage.
Let's talk about one of those festivals, Saturnalia. I have to admit, it sounds a lot more fun than your average Christmas dinner.
It was a really, really wild celebration. So imagine this week-long festival in ancient Rome, with feasting, gift-giving, and even, get this, role reversals, where slaves and masters would temporarily switch places. That was Saturnalia, a celebration to honor Saturn, the god of agriculture.
A whole week of festivities and role reversals. Yeah. I mean, it really makes you think, did this temporary, inversion of these social roles reflect maybe a deep human need for, societal change or questioning authority? A theme that perhaps unintentionally, found its way into Christmas celebrations.
That's such an interesting thought. It really speaks to that idea that a lot of our rituals, even those with religious origins, tap into fundamental human desires, needs.
It's wild. It's incredible to think that, many of our beloved Christmas customs, like decorating with evergreens and exchanging gifts, that came directly from this Roman bash. So it wasn't originally about celebrating the birth of Jesus at all.
Nope, not at all. Early Christians adopted these practices to ease the transition for new converts. It was a really clever way to make Christianity more appealing by incorporating these familiar, enjoyable traditions that people already loved. You could call it a really brilliant early marketing strategy.
Yeah, right. It makes you wonder if any of those early Christians had second thoughts about their strategy when they found themselves putting up evergreen boughs year after year.
Maybe. But clearly it worked. And it wasn't just about merging traditions. They were also really good at creating new narratives. They took existing symbols and gave them a Christian interpretation. For example, the Roman tradition of putting evergreen boughs in their homes during Saturnalia, that directly translates to our modern day use of Christmas trees.
Speaking of evolving traditions, we can't forget about Santa Claus. He's become so iconic. But I'm guessing his origins are a lot more complicated than the story we told children.
You're right. Santa Claus isn't just some jolly old elf. He's this fascinating blend of global myths and traditions. Think. Saint Nicholas, the generous 4th century bishop mixed with Odin, the Norse god, who rode a flying horse and delivered gifts during Yule, the winter solstice celebration.
Wait, Odin, the Norse god with the eye patch? He doesn't exactly scream Christmas cheer.
Well, he might not fit that, modern image, but Odin had this long white beard and a flying horse, elements that definitely contributed to how we see Santa today. And it reminds us that these cultural icons are rarely original, but rather fascinating evolutions. They're drawing inspiration from all these different sources. Makes you wonder why the early church decided to blend figures like Odin and St. Nicholas into the modern Santa Claus, right?
Absolutely, yeah. That blending of figures is really fascinating to me. And it wasn't just Odin and St. Nicholas. I mean, even Coca-Cola's marketing in the 20th century played a role in how Santa looks today. That jolly red-suited figure we all know. It really shows you the power of storytelling and how it can really shape how we think about these mythical figures.
100%. It's such a great example of how these cultural icons are constantly changing and being reinterpreted to fit the times.
It's like these ancient stories and beliefs are still shaping our modern celebrations in ways that we don't even realize. Okay, now I'm ready for another mind-blowing connection. What about astrology? How does that fit into all this, the Christmas story?
Astrology played a huge role in shaping ancient religions and their celebrations, and Christianity was no exception. This might sound surprising, but there's some really fascinating astrological connections woven into the story of Jesus. Connections that really help us understand the holiday's origins even better.
Okay, I'm all ears. What kind of connections are we talking about?
Well, think about the Star of Bethlehem, for example. While it's often shown as like a magical or miraculous sign, it could actually represent a real celestial alignment, possibly like a conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn in the constellation Pisces.
Wait, so a real astronomical event led the wise men to baby Jesus. That's really interesting.
Right. And this conjunction in Pisces, a sign often connected to spirituality and sacrifice, could very well have been interpreted as this big cosmic sign predicting the arrival of an important spiritual figure. It adds a whole other meaning to the Nativity story.
Yeah, it really does. It makes you wonder if those early Christians knew about this astrological significance or if it was all just a coincidence.
That's the question, isn't it? Intentional or not, the symbolism is definitely there, and it's powerful.
For sure, for sure. Are there other astrological connections that we should know about?
Definitely. So the Virgin Mary, her association with purity and motherhood, that's interesting when you think about the constellation Virgo, which is often depicted as, well, a virgin, probably not a coincidence, right? The symbolism is pretty hard to miss. Even the 12 disciples could be seen as mirroring the 12 signs of the zodiac, suggesting this connection to these big cosmic cycles and spiritual completion.
Wow. So the story of Jesus might be full of this hidden astrological symbolism that really adds another layer of complexity and makes you think about those deeper metaphorical meanings in these ancient narratives.
It does. It challenges us to look beyond just the literal interpretation and consider how ancient people looked at the world, and the cosmos.
Okay, so we've got these pagan festivals, Norse gods, and astrological symbolism. It's all starting to come together. There's a lot to take in.
It is, but the main point here is that early Christianity was very, very smart in how they absorbed and adapted these traditions that were already out there. It wasn't about wiping out paganism. It was about creating a new story that really resonated with people's existing beliefs and experiences.
So merging traditions, a really clever strategy. But do you think there were any downsides to doing that, or maybe unintended consequences?
That's a really good question. It's something that historians are still debating. Some argue that, blending all these traditions meant losing those original meanings and practices, while others believe that it actually made both Christianity and the pagan traditions it absorbed richer and stronger.
Interesting. It's fascinating to think about how those ancient influences still shape how we celebrate Christmas today. Makes you wonder, what other hidden stories are tucked away in our everyday rituals? What do they say about us? About our history?
Absolutely. And that's actually a perfect transition to our next topic. Let's talk about how Christianity adopted other holidays. Did they kind of go on this rebranding spree? We'll uncover all that next. I think it's safe to say that early Christians, they were really good at spotting opportunities to connect with those already existing cultural practices and beliefs.
Okay, so besides Christmas, what other holidays might have those, hidden pagan origins?
One of the big ones is Easter. So while it celebrates the resurrection of Jesus, a lot of the traditions that we think of when we think of Easter, like eggs and bunnies, those have roots in ancient spring fertility festivals.
Right, yeah. Eggs and bunnies definitely symbolize, new life, spring. It seems like a natural fit for a holiday that's all about resurrection.
Exactly. And these symbols, they actually predate Christianity. They were connected to goddesses like Ishre, who represented dawn, new beginnings. So the church, very cleverly, aligned Easter with the spring equinox, a time of, rebirth and renewal in nature, linking it to the idea of Jesus' resurrection. Just another example of them taking something that was already popular and giving it that Christian spin.
You're listening to Echoes of Insight, where we dive deep into the topics shaping our world. From the planet and politics to health, consciousness, economy, and alternative lifestyles. If you're enjoying the journey, make sure to subscribe and share this podcast with others who love exploring new perspectives.
So they were basically saying, hey, you're already celebrating rebirth this time of year. Why not add Jesus to the mix? I love it. Were there any other holidays that they, kind of rebranded?
Oh, absolutely. All Saints' Day, which is celebrated on November 1st, has some interesting connections too. It happens around the same time as Samhain, an ancient Celtic festival that marked the end of the harvest season and the start of winter.
Samhain, okay, that rings a bell. Is that connected to Halloween?
You got it. Samhain was a time when people believed that the veil between the living and the dead was really thin, and that's where a lot of our Halloween imagery comes from. So All Saints' Day, you could look at it as like a Christianized version of this Celtic festival for honoring the dead.
It's interesting how the church managed to bring all these different traditions together, creating this sense of continuity for those new converts.
Hmm.
Do you think this approach, helped Christianity spread more easily?
Absolutely, 100%. By incorporating familiar elements from those existing belief systems, they made it easier for people to kind of, transition to a new faith. Instead of saying, hey, drop everything you know and love, they offered a way to adapt and reinterpret what was already familiar and meaningful to people.
Right, right. It's a good reminder that, religious and cultural evolution, it's not always about completely erasing and replacing. It's often about, like you said, adapting and blending.
Exactly. And that's what makes the history of these holidays so fascinating to dig into. It's a reminder that traditions, they're fluid, constantly changing, adapting to the changing needs and beliefs of society.
So we've talked about Christmas, Easter, All Saints' Day. Were there any other holidays that, went through this kind of transformation?
Oh, tons of holidays have roots that go way back into our shared past. Even something like Pentecost, which celebrates the descent of the Holy Spirit. It has ties to ancient agricultural celebrations, first fruit offerings. It seems like really early Christianity adopted this if you can't beat them, join them approach with those established pagan traditions.
It's amazing how much history is hidden in plain sight. It's woven into, how we celebrate these holidays. Thinking about it, it makes sense that those early Christian leaders would want to make converting to Christianity as easy as possible, right? Wouldn't people be hesitant to change their traditions?
Of course. It's human nature, to want to stick with what you know. So if we're trying to get people to follow a new religion, you don't want to force them to give up everything they hold dear. Integrating those elements of their existing beliefs and practices, that was a really smart move. It helped people feel like there was continuity, and it made Christianity more appealing.
It's so interesting how those influences from so long ago are still shaping how we celebrate today. It makes you wonder, what other hidden stories are tucked away in our everyday rituals?
It really does. And maybe, even more importantly, it makes us ask ourselves, what do our traditions and rituals mean to us today? Are they still relevant to our lives? Do they actually line up with our values and beliefs? Or are they just habits that we've inherited without really thinking about what they mean?
That's a really great question, and one that I think we can dig into a bit more. But first, I think we need a moment to just sit with all this information. It's a lot to process. So as we wrap up our exploration into Christmas, I'm thinking about all those layers we've uncovered. The pagan roots, the rebranding by the early Christians, those astrological connections. It's a lot.
It really is. And it highlights just how complex, human history and culture are, and how those threads from way back when are still part of our celebrations today.
Yeah. What stands out to you as the most, insightful or maybe surprising thing we've talked about in this deep dive?
I think for me, it's realizing that Christianity's strategy of absorbing those pagan traditions was really key to why this holiday is still so popular. By connecting Christmas with the winter solstice and adding in elements of Saturnalia, they really tapped into this deep human need for celebration, and renewal during the darkest time of year.
Mhm. And they managed to make a holiday that appeals to people on so many different levels: spiritual, cultural, even psychological.
Right. And I think that's why Christmas is still so popular, even for those who might not consider themselves, devout Christians. It speaks to that universal desire for light, for hope, and for connection, things that we all crave, especially during those cold winter months.
And we can't forget about the power of symbolism. Those evergreen trees, gift giving, the feasting, they all have so many layers of meaning that have been developing for centuries.
Definitely. And those meanings still resonate with us today, even if we're not consciously thinking about where they came from. It's like they're just part of us,
It is interesting how we tend to focus on the commercial side of Christmas, the shopping, the presents, the decorations. But under all of that, there's this like rich history of spirituality and symbolism.
Yeah, it's like those layers are woven into the holiday itself. And I think it's up to each of us to decide which threads we want to focus on, which parts of the tradition are most important to us, in our own celebrations.
That's a good point. It's not about just blindly following tradition, but understanding it, where it comes from, and then deciding how we want to make it our own.
Exactly. It's finding that balance between honoring the past and creating a future that reflects who we are.
So as you gather with your loved ones this Christmas, I really encourage you to just take a second and think about those deeper meanings behind the rituals and the traditions. What do they mean to you? How do they connect you to the past, to the present, even to the future?
And as you're unwrapping those gifts, think about the tradition of gift giving, how it's a symbol of abundance and generosity. It's a reminder that we're all connected and that what we do has the power to bring joy and light into the world.
That's a beautiful thought.
Yep.
And on that note, we're going to wrap up our deep dive into the history of Christmas. It's been an interesting journey, full of unexpected twists and turns.
It really has. I hope this has encouraged our listeners to keep asking questions, keep exploring, keep looking for those echoes of insight that connect us to our shared human story.
And to our listeners, as we end this episode, we want you to consider this. How do your own beliefs, your purpose, influence how you celebrate this holiday? What rituals, what traditions really mean something to you? Maybe this Christmas, as you're taking part in the festivities, you'll see them a little differently, appreciating those echoes of the past that are still with us today.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Echoes of Insight. If you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and share it with someone who loves exploring big ideas. Together, let's keep the conversation going. See you next time.